Hello everyone, this is Elizabeth Creamer coming to you from Blacksburg, Virginia in the United States. It's November 21, 2021. This is the fifth in my YouTube series called Full Disclosure. And by that I mean it's a sort of mentoring program with insider tips about policies and practices in academe that are often unspoken. This particular video is tackling the topic of reviewing manuscripts and suggesting there's a lot of personal benefit to doing that. So I'm making an argument about why it's important to accept the professional responsibility of reviewing manuscripts. My background to do this is that I was a faculty member until 2018 for 38 years at a single institution, regrettably, and a single research university, certainly not the top of the food chain. And these are sort of insights I've gained, particularly as I have become more and more engaged with an international community of scholars. My own research interests involve grounded theory. Using grounded theory with mixed methods is a new book I just finished. And I have another book called An Introduction to Fully Integrated Mixed Methods Research. So this is the fifth video in a series. And let me tell you why I have this picture of a painting with chairs. I imagine that many of you working remotely or in distant locations are not in a position where you get to sit down across a table from a senior mentor or scholar in your own setting over a cup of coffee or lunch to have the kind of informal chats where a lot of the information about policies and practices are communicated. Now, I'm fully aware of the equity issues that are involved behind that those are very loaded for people who are in situations where they are members of marginalized populations. So this is partly to make some of those policies transparent. It's also sort of an intermediary mentoring, because one of the things that I was caught in is you may get well-meaning and well-intentioned mentoring in your own setting, but you aspire perhaps to move up the food chain, to move up to a more prestigious institution. So sometimes the local advice you get is true locally, but it could disadvantage you if you're trying to move up and out into another kind of position. So as I mentioned, I've done 4. Let me quickly summarize the previous 4. The first one is arguing about being an activist in your citing practices, and that's the first one. It's called Strategic Citing Practices. It's encouraging you to think of that as a form of activism, to be deliberate about being more inclusive in who you cite, to recognize multiple generations of scholars, and scholars who are working from positions where it's very difficult to get visibility, such as in the Caribbean or Africa. The second one was about self-plagiarism, but it's not the normal rant about self-plagiarism. It's suggesting there is a time and place, not for plagiarism, but for self-citing that is strategic, to build an argument, for instance, that your work is focused and has a clear research agenda. The third one is tips when you're in a situation where you feel like you're staring at a cement wall when you're trying to write and nothing is coming. You've got your fingers on the keyboard or your hand on a pencil and you're a blank slate. It's like nothing is coming. You're frozen. Deadline looming, no doubt. The fourth one is writing a methodological article. I happen to be one of the editors of Methods in Psychology. It's a methodological journal. I'm in charge of the mixed methods strand. These are articles that focus on a procedure, a tool that other researchers might use. Perhaps it's visual display. Perhaps it's using concept maps. Perhaps it's simply about reflexivity and positionality. So you're really taking a construct or a tool and explaining not only how you used it, but how others might use it. So let's tackle the task of why most people think that it's not their job to review manuscript. First of all, everyone knows that the academic life is chaotic, too much multitasking. We already have more things on our plate than is possible to get done. You got papers pouring in. You got your own papers you're trying to get out, and is the 3 to 4 hours as something that you feel like you cannot wedge another 3 or 4 hours. You get many requests, the little green bubble. I probably get 4 to 5 a week. I might accept 1 out of 5. I normally have about 3 manuscripts that I've accepted to review. I do 1 maybe every 2 weeks. And I'm a retired faculty member, so I don't have any more time, or maybe have a little more time. But I still think there's some gains to me to doing reviews. And finally, let's look at the issue of credit. Never during my merit reviews did anyone say, well, look, that's great. You reviewed 10 manuscripts. That's just wonderful. Pat, pat, pat. It was always about the manuscripts that I produced, the grants that I got, even though there was a place to list manuscripts that you've reviewed. So there's an expectation for that. It can be a preliminary indicator of an exposure that extends outside of your institution. So let's look at 6 reasons why you might review. First one, let's say staying up to date. I always get something out of manuscripts reviews. It might be an idea, it might be a site. Often manuscripts can be, and they're not often, but sometimes manuscripts are cutting edge. The article itself won't come out for 6 or 8 months, but there's something in there that's pretty contemporary and pretty useful to you. I almost always find something useful. Secondly, I almost always mark up a reference list. Actually, it's usually the first thing I look at. And I almost always find something in a journal I don't normally read, outside of my immediate awareness, and I pick it up. Something new, it could be something old sometimes. Reviewing manuscripts down here on the third one is a way to improve your own writing skills. You can do it one of 2 ways. Sometimes you get a manuscript that is so well written, so well organized, so well laid out. You admire it and you think, oh, that's a good way to write an abstract. Oh, it's an interesting way to arrange your visuals. Look at that discussion section. I'm really learning how I could build a stronger discussion section. The flip side is, it could be a negative example. It could be a poorly organized paper. It could be a poor example. But sometimes you can gain writing skills, from poor examples as well. I mentioned a little bit earlier the idea that reviewing manuscripts is one way that you can begin to develop or continue to develop evidence that you have international exposure. The journal I work with is out of the UK. Some journals have international right in the title. So part of moving up the ladder is the wider and wider circle of impact you can prove you have. And reviewing is one way to do that. Reviewing a manuscript for this one, the 5th one, it's the same skills you're going to use if you're in a position to review student papers. It's the same sort of balance. Praise for the good, constructive criticism for what can be improved. Finally, if you've been writing on a topic and you find articles on that topic or related topics, you can have the pleasure of seeing how you're cited. Sometimes the cites are not very meaningful, but sometimes it's very, very rewarding to see that someone's taken an idea of yours and built on it. So what's your job as a reviewer? Think of yourself as a type of mentor. You are offering specific recommendations about how to improve the text. There is no manuscript that cannot be improved, even if it starts out really good. You may know something that can help them. You may know a site that they really need to consider. You may be able to make a suggestion about how to improve the manuscript. So let me just give you one example. Last week I reviewed a manuscript. It was terribly poorly organized. It was almost as if it was like a running list. It was almost like an annotated bibliography. It's like I read this and here's my conclusions, all on the same topic. I read this and this is my conclusions. So it would have been easy for me to blast out, not helpful, but easy, to blast out and say, I just can't follow the logic of this article. You flip the argument. You just flip it by saying, you could strengthen the logic of this article by, here are a couple suggestions. Use more headings. Add a section following the purpose statement explaining the flow of your paper. So you've made the same point. The logic's is hard to follow, but you've turned it into some concrete suggestions about what they could do to improve it.